Great. Let's let our electrolysis run for 2 or 3 minutes. As it's running, let's consider some of what is happening. What is the bubble formation indicative of? So the bubble formation is indicating that there is some sort of gas that's forming at the 2 electrodes or the thumbtacks, which are the electrodes. Does anyone else observe any other things that are happening? It could be important to write those down as well. Also, what do you notice about the amounts of gases being formed? So you should notice that more gas is being formed at one thumbtack relative to another thumbtack. This is one indicator that the chemical reactions at the 2 electrodes are different. This is expected given our knowledge that oxidation reactions occur at the anode, whereas reduction reactions occur at the cathode. Now that we've run our experiment, let's move on and try to fill out the running the electrolysis and analyzing results portion of our handout. Let's first think about what step of the scientific method we're in, which is analyzing the results. So in order to analyze our results, we need to think about what the identity of the gases being formed were. So to do that, we should consider the reactions of water and nitrogen, which are our 2 target substrates for this reaction. So here's a water oxidation half reaction. You may remember it from the video that I showed before, but it's not balanced this time. Who can balance this equation by filling in these blanks here? So in order to balance this equation, you should put a 3 in front of H2O and a 6 in front of your protons. Next is nitrogen reduction. And that happens by combining into protons from water oxidation and electrons from water oxidation to make ammonia. Who can balance this reaction by filling in the blank? So if you put a 6 here, you are correct. So now we can try to add these reactions together to get the overall chemical reaction that we would be seeing in our electrochemical cell if we were making ammonia. What result do you get from this addition? So the overall result that you should get is N2 plus 3H2O goes to 1.5 O2 and 2 ammonia. Now that we have this overall reaction, we can finally assess the validity of our hypothesis by determining if we made ammonia. If this oxidation reaction and this reduction reaction were indeed happening, what would we expect the ratio of gases evolved at the 2 electrodes be? So a hint here is that you can look at your coefficients of the gases produced from your overall reaction. So ammonia and O2 are both gases. So the answer that we're looking here is 4 to 3. So we would expect a ratio of 4 to 3 between the 2 syringes. This is probably not the ratio that you saw. So the question is, what is the approximate ratio of gases that were formed at the 2 electrodes? And does that ratio suggest that we're actually doing this reaction to make ammonia? It doesn't. So let's revisit our hypothesis and determine whether or not it's confirmed. So if ammonia had been produced in our cell, we would expect a ratio of 4 to 3 ammonia to O2 between the 2 syringes. Instead, we did not. So we have to consider something else in our reaction, and our solution may have been reacting in order to make a gas. Can anyone think about something else that's present in solution that could have reacted? So it turns out that protons, which are present from water oxidation, can be reduced. So that reaction is called proton reduction and occurs by taking 6 protons and 6 electrons and making 3 equivalents of H2, which is a gas. So hydrogen would have been formed. Now let's take a look at the overall reaction that would have been occurring had proton reduction been occurring at the cathode and water oxidation been occurring at the anode. So if we add them together, what we get is this overall reaction of taking 3 equivalents of H2O to 3 halves of O2 and 3 equivalents of H2. So what ratio of gases we have expected for this set of reactions in this new overall reaction? So if we'd been making ammonia, we would have again expected a ratio of gases of 4:3. If we'd been doing proton reduction from water, we would have instead gotten a ratio of 2 equivalents of H2 for every 1 equivalent of O2. So do you still stand by your original hypothesis even after this new suggestion? Another added piece of knowledge which could help in your decision is that ammonia is very water soluble. So if it had been produced at an electrode, we may not have seen the bubbles forming because the gas would have immediately become dissolved in the water around the thumbtack. Does this affect your reflection on your hypothesis? Awesome. So now that we've analyzed our results, we can move on to a stage where we try to conclude exactly what happened and how to move on. So I'll pause here to give everyone a chance to catch up. So we've moved on to this last part of the scientific method where we revise our hypothesis. Now that we've been able to study it, we move to the last segment where we figure out exactly what to do with this knowledge. We also want to revisit the experiment to see if we can potentially envision other ways of answering our original research question. So in conclusion, we did not make ammonia today, but we did make H2. It's important to know, so this is an interesting result, making H2 is, because hydrogen is a clean and carbon-free fuel. While this may not solve our specific question, it may nevertheless be interesting because hydrogen has relevance for hydrogen fuel cells. Furthermore, it's important to know that in science, this experimental outcome, where your hypothesis is not correct, is quite common and pretty acceptable. As long as you made sure that your experiment tested your original hypothesis and you learned something along the way, you've done the scientific method successfully. This is the most important part of the scientific method, learning something about your original research question. Finally, the last thing that we can do is try to think about what we could have done differently in our experiment to achieve a different result. Can anyone think of other things that we could have tried and parts of the experiment that we could have tweaked to try to get a different result? So these three all represent viable answers, including trying a different solvent than water. You can think about what solvent that might be. We could try a different electrode material. So if we had thumbtacks made of something else, that could have affected things. And then finally, we could try the same experiment under a different atmosphere. So keep in mind that nitrogen, while a major component of air, it does not compose 100% of it. So you could imagine that a different result potentially could have been obtained if we'd done the same experiment in an atmosphere of 100% nitrogen. Great. So thank you for doing this experiment with me today. And I'll sign off here. I hope you learned a lot about the scientific method and the electrochemistry that we do on a daily basis as part of the collaboration that I'm in.